This is a clip from Patrick Thibodeau, who is suggesting we look at Cornell West announcing for president. Apologies to the live watchers. I didn't hit the record button. The long and short of it is, I am glad that, just the short of it, I'm glad that there are folks running against Biden. And I think, even though I'm likely to vote for Biden in the primaries, well as in the general, I think they might be laying out a case for what we can make, at the very least, what we can make Biden do in 2024. Let's jump right into it. Let's have a look.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Well, the 2024 presidential race is becoming more crowded. Former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie and former Vice President Mike Pence have both joined the Republican race. Meanwhile, the philosophy professor and civil rights activist Cornell West has announced he's running for president as a candidate with the People's Party.
Usual disclaimer. This does not actually have anything to do with anything. I just want to say, anybody that looks like this, anybody that's bringing this kind of energy to the fight for justice in the United States of America is surely somebody who's got my attention. You're yelling into a microphone and you're wearing a suit? Ooh. Somebody that looks like an aging nerd? Ooh. Hello. So on aesthetics, he's got me, for sure. That said, I am, as they say, a lefty from way back, and aesthetics don't actually matter. I'm just having fun, because it's Friday Peace Talks.
In a short video released Monday, Dr. West criticized both the Democratic and Republican parties.
We're not talking about hating anybody. We're talking about loving. We're talking about affirming. We're talking about empowering those who have been pushed to the margins. Because neither political party wants to tell the truth about Wall Street, about Ukraine, about the Pentagon, about big tech.
Wait 1 GD minute. First of all, yes, I saw those French cuffs, and yes, I do approve. But I don't approve so much that I'm going to let you get away with saying nobody's talking truth about Ukraine. Only thing he better have to say on that is that we need to end this quicker by arming them more. There is no acceptable reason for Russia to be sending soldiers in to Ukraine to kill Ukrainians. It is an invasion. It must be repelled. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about that. Only buts I will accept is the kicking of Ruski ass. No, sir. There is somebody, as far as I've seen, telling the truth about Ukraine, and that would be the Democratic Party, led by Joe Biden. And hell, even Republicans. This is not a controversial issue. And if you think it is, it's because a Russian propagandist has gotten into your ear. Ask yourself why the hell anybody would say is acceptable for one country to invade and take over another. We were supposed to have left that in the 20th century, and our souls may be damned for permitting it in the 21st. It's the kind of thing that makes me hope there is such a thing as hell, so I will see Putin there so I can kick his ass personally. Real big red flag right off the bat.
West's announcement surprised many political observers. In 2008, he endorsed Barack Obama, but later became a vocal critic of the Obama-Biden administration. In 2016 and 2020, he backed Bernie Sanders in the Democratic primaries. Cornell West is now running as a member of the People's Party, which was founded by a former staffer of Sanders after the 2016 election as an alternative to the two-party system. This will be the first time the party has fielded a candidate for president. According to the New Republic, the People's Party has ballot access in barely a handful of states. Dr. West is one of the nation's most recognized public intellectuals. He's a professor of philosophy and Christian practice at Union Theological Seminary. He formerly taught at Princeton and Harvard universities. He's joining us now from Irvine, California. Cornell West, welcome back to Democracy Now! It's great to have you with us. Can you talk about why you've decided to run for President of the United States?
First, Sister Amy, I want to salute you. You are an exemplar of longevity, of integrity, and consistency. And, you know, we go back many, many decades. So I just want to always begin on that note. You're putting a smile on Brother George and Sister Dorothy's face, your precious parents. But no, my announcement of running for President of the United States to be head of the empire to help dismantle it in such a way that poor and working people would be at the very center, at the very core of our vision of what a good society actually is. It has to do, as you can imagine, with these very bleak times, these very desperate times. So it's a kind of act of desperation. You know, I'm 70 years old. I've been at this for 55 years, and I have a calling that flows out of the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. and Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel and Edward Said and Chief Joseph and Dorothy Day and Grace Lee Boggs and Louisa Marino. All of those are the best of America. And I think we're at such a low point that America needs to be reintroduced to its best. And its best has always been the movements for justice, the struggles for freedom, the solidarity based on a fundamental commitment to the dignity of those Sly Stone calls everyday people. And there's no doubt in my mind that the two-party system now is a major impediment for the empowerment of poor and working people. I'm thoroughly convinced that, of course, the neo-fascist Republican Party has already made it very clear that they're tied to big business and big military, big tech.
Yes, and so are the Democrats, which I think he's getting to. Just want to jump in myself and say that. And I also want to tell you, folks, if you think that was an insult, it's not. Neo-fascist, that is an accurate way to describe the current Republican Party. Another way to put fascist would be to say using demagoguery to ignore democratic values. In other words, scaring people to try to get them to give up their own rights. That's what we had. That's what we had with George W. Bush as well. It was just we all, most of us at least, willingly gave in. We just said, yes, we're scared. We don't want another 9/11. Please, please, have ICE be a thing. Please have the right to look into all of our phones secretly. Patriot Act. Yes, please give our police tanks. We have states right now that are trying to make it illegal to go to other states and do things that are legal in those states. In other words, if you are a resident of Florida, you're supposed to be considered a citizen of Florida more than a citizen of the United States, and you are subject to Florida laws no matter where you roam. That is neo-fascism.
and so forth. And the milquetoast neoliberal Democratic Party strikes me as being incapable of taking seriously the fundamental needs of poor and working people, not just here, but around the world. The militarism abroad, $7 billion frozen for the brothers and sisters in Afghanistan, and what's been AFRICOM in Africa, and what's been going on in the Middle East. Thank God that you keep track of the precious Palestinian brothers and sisters and all the hell that they're catching. You have it every day, and I thank God that you do. Why? Because Palestinian peoples deserve to have a visibility in terms of their suffering and ways in which they can attempt to get out from under. Same would be true, of course, for our Jewish brothers and sisters in Russia or in a France where their rights are being violated. We're wrestling with organized greed. We're wrestling with institutionalized hatred. We saw that with our precious gay brothers and lesbian sisters and queer siblings in the earlier report. But it's also a matter of routinized indifference. There's an indifference to the plight of the vulnerable. More and more, it's becoming not just a fad and a fashion, it's becoming a normalized way of life. And that is what leads toward wholesale fascism, not just here, but in other parts of the world. And we've seen it, of course, in Hungary. You see it, we saw it in Brazil. We can go on and on in this regard. So for me, it's really a matter of trying to be consistent with what I've been about for the last 55 years.
Cornell, you talk about militarism. I want to ask you about Russia's invasion of Ukraine. In March of last year, you told The New Yorker, we must try to stop the war, recognizing that the American empire has little or no moral authority when it comes to violation of international law and the overthrow of national sovereignty, as in Latin America, the Middle East, and Asia. You've also called Putin, you've been
No. We must stop the war, recognizing that the American empire has little or no moral authority when it comes to violation of international law and the overthrow of national sovereignty. Boil that down to simple, like recognizable everyday actions. Imagine we are thieves and we burglars. And we break into homes, and we have a history of breaking into homes, and we say, we're not going to do it anymore. We're not going to break into people's homes and steal things. And we look across the street, and we see a person with a stereotypical ski mask, and, let's just say with a bloody knife as well. And they throw a rock through a window, and they unlatch the window, and they pull it up and they climb into the home, and we pick up the phone, we start dialing, and our roommate, a fellow burglar, turns to us and says, stop. We don't have the moral authority. We don't have the moral authority when it comes to a violation of other people's property rights. And then we put the phone down and we nod our head solemnly. That's right. We don't have the moral authority. That's asinine. That is a exceedingly ridiculous idea. He should be embarrassed that he said those words in an interview with The New Yorker. What does he mean, stop the war? We must stop the war. War can stop tomorrow if Russia decides to leave. We are not supporting the invaders. This is the kind of language that made sense in Iraq, where we were the invaders. It made sense in the Middle East, sure. It made sense when we were funding the Contras. Yeah. When we were funding the aggressors, or when we were the aggressors ourselves, it made sense for us to say, we must stop the war. It breaks my heart to see people on the left take a stance that war is bad, so we must let people who are getting attacked give up. We must encourage them to simply put their throats on Russian bayonets and shove forward because we believe in peace. Asinine. Right there. Right there. It's even if he misspoke, the idea that you would be so irresponsible as to accidentally say what it appears he's saying there disqualifies him for further consideration. I would like to hear his opinions on things simply for the value in criticizing the Biden administration, but I'll tell you, if this was if this was me viewing something purely as a voter, trying to decide who I should vote for, that would be the end of it. You don't need to exhaust yourself by also weighing what the rest of what they have to say is. That right there, done. It shows a lack of understanding about what is happening that is so severe that you need not consider any further, in my humble opinion. That said, Cornell West is a very educated man, and his criticisms of Biden are something I'm going to want to see and perhaps adopt. So let's keep looking. But I'll tell you, your old pal Jake, not going to be supporting the Cornell West candidacy in any way, shape, or form based off of his suggestion that we stop the war, apparently, because we used to be Russia. So the thing to do now is to let Russia kill Ukrainian people.
You've also called Putin, you've been severely critical of President Putin for the invasion. Talk about your views on what happened, what is happening, and how the war needs to end.
Well, one, I think you have the clash of two empires. The Russian Empire is a deeply wounded empire. It's had its territory cut back. Of course, its economy is shrinking. And then you've got the American Empire, which is the most powerful empire in the history of the world. In fact, it's the 68th empire out of the 70, going back to the beginning of the human species. And so on the one hand, you have the promise of the American Empire to the elites in the Russian Empire: we will not move an inch. And within decades, 14 of the satellite countries of the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union, are part of NATO. There's missiles right on the borders and boundaries of the Russian Empire. Now, we know empires behave like empires. I mean, if there's missiles in Canada and Mexico, the U.S. government would blow them to smithereens quick. We saw it in Cuba in 1962. So that empires behave like empires. They're greedy. They're driven by predatory capitalist dispositions. They're obsessed with hierarchy. They're concerned with domination and conquest. The Alexander the Great, associated with a grand empire. So that in that regard, there's no doubt in my mind that the expansion of NATO has played a crucial role in the wounded Russian Empire with all.
2 points. Number one, Ukraine was not and is not part of NATO. They absolutely will be after they finish beating the Jim Christ out of Russia. Point number two, just like it was not for us to decide what other it's not for us to decide that other countries must join NATO. It's also not for us to decide if other countries don't have to join NATO. If Canada asked for those missiles to be put in Canada, I don't care what we would have done, we wouldn't have the right to say they can't. Why? Because Canada is not the United States. Canada can do as it pleases with Canadian territory. Similarly, Ukraine is not Russia. If Ukraine wants to join NATO, let me check what percentage of it is Russia's business. Let me just do the calculations here. Goose egg. That's a big fat 0. It is not their business. And it is certainly not for Russia to invade Ukraine. John Bailey saying hello from California. Hello, my friend. Dump Cornell, he says. Oh, good to see you. Good to see you, my friend. Yeah, I think Cornell West is just straight up wrong here. You know that, so let's get through this. I hesitate to skip forward. We might, though. What I really want to hear from him is his critiques of the Biden administration when it comes to domestic affairs, in particular when it comes to working with big business. Biden's hung his hat on fixing the climate problem, and he has not been satisfactory to me. I don't think he has done such a bad job that I can't see myself voting for him. Not so, because I believe he is swayable. But the way in which he must be swayed, I think, will likely be laid out by Cornell West right here. So let's look. Whoopsie daisy.
Of its repression, all of its regimentation. Let us never forget about the thousands of Russian brothers and sisters who are going to jail in opposition to gangster Putin's criminal invasion.
Good for them.
But he's pushed against the wall and he responds. That's how heads of empire respond. So we've got to be in solidarity with the suffering of Ukrainian brothers and sisters. But we have to recognize NATO is an instrument of American imperial foreign policy. We've seen it over and over again, and so we're witnessing a proxy war. There must be a ceasefire. There must be a stopping of that war. Why? We're on the road to nuclear war. That's the last thing we want to see, my dear sister.
Oh, and as president, painful. What exactly would you do to stop that war?
Oh, one is I would pull back on the U.S. military support. I would sit down with the elites from the Chinese empire, given all of their forms of regimentation and repression in their own context. Think about our precious Muslim brothers and sisters in China, the Uyghurs. But I would sit down with the Chinese. I would sit down with the Ukrainians. I would sit down with the Russians and say, we're going to stop this war, and we're going to come up with a plan, a process with a variety of voices heard to make sure that the suffering stops and we understand and we're honest about the larger context of the war. And unfortunately, we just don't get this kind of perspective, in corporate media.
All right, I am going to just fast forward through the rest of the Ukraine stuff. I have to respond to that, though. What is Russia going to need in this negotiate? What is there to negotiate? Here is the only acceptable outcome. And goddamn, every leader we've had that has failed, including, brace yourselves, including Obama. The only acceptable outcome is Russia gets the F out of a country it's invading, including Crimea. That's the only acceptable outcome. Now, apparently, in order to do that, they need to be shot because they are sending troops with guns to kill people and forcibly take over land. Is it sad that that's happening? Yes. Is it the fault of Ukraine? Absolutely not. Ridiculous. Hopefully.
That you never lose hope in having solidarity with oppressed people around the world. And of course, the third element is improvisation. And improvisation is about what? Well, it's not just an artistic skill. The Ron Carter's geniuses like that still alive remind us. It's also a form of practical wisdom. As freedom fighters, we got to be improvisational. We got to be flexible. We got to be fluid. We got to be protean. We got to learn how to listen. We can't be dogmatic. We can't be ossified. We can't be petrified in how we look at the world. And right now,
Okay. If you can't tell what somebody's talking about partway through it, it's a bad sign. This is just general politics. I do think Cornell West overall very useful voice, but I mean, as a sign, should he be the leader? If I can't tell about the nuts and bolts of what he's talking about, he's saying we've got to be protean. I don't think that was meant for the average person to hear what he's saying and understand what he's saying. And if he's not trying to say things that the average person, of which I am an example, whether you like it or not, if they can't understand what you're saying and you know it, and he ought to know it, then I question the honesty here.
have to have presidential debate, and
16. You were a surrogate for Bernie Sanders. In fact, in 2016, he chose you as one of the people to write the Democratic Party platform. Have you talked to him about your campaign, you deciding to go outside the two-party system? He ran although he is an independent and a socialist, he ran inside the Democratic Party. And has he given you advice?
No, I haven't talked to Bernie recently. We just did a wonderful event based on his wonderful book with Brother John Nichols there in Brooklyn, Academy of Music. We had a wonderful time, Sister Jane and my beloved wife, Anahita. We had a wonderful time with him. And Bernie will always be my brother. I've got a forever love for that brother. We just have disagreements. I don't think he would be surprised, though, because I, of course, supported the Greens with Sister Jill Stein. After I supported him, just like I'd go back to the great Ralph Nader. And a lot of people try to view those two as spoilers. They're not spoilers at all. You had mediocre neoliberal candidates who could not galvanize the public, so you don't blame it on the weaker parties. And we will never actually be able to deal with the escalating fascism in America with milquetoast neoliberalism. You just end up with caretaker government. You end up with postponing the collapse of democracy, as my dear brother Jeff Stout says. Well, you have to get at the roots of fascism, which means I'm going to Trump country, Sister Amy. I'm going to talk to those white brothers and talk to those white sisters and say, excellent. Quit scapegoating the most vulnerable. Let us confront the most powerful. I don't have a minute for any kind of xenophobia, but at the same time, I know you're catching hell. I know many of you have been losers in corporate globalization. Excellent. You've been pushed against the wall by big monopolies and oligopolies. You have difficulty trying to engage in any kind of unionization. You have to transform and transpose and filter your fears through different means rather than following a neo-fascist Pied Piper. We got to be able to speak to these folk directly and as fellow citizens, and I plan to do that. Now, of course.
Okay, so let me give some closing thoughts here. First of all, great suggestion. Love the clip. Love it. I wanted to hear what Cornell West was going to be all about. I was disappointed that with our usual third-party lefties, we have the same thing happening. Vagueness. Not talking about how he's going to talk with people, not talking about what he's going to do so much. And that's true for the American voters that he was discussing right there. That's also true for when he was talking about Ukraine. What are you going to try to accomplish? I'm going to sit them down and talk. Okay, when we're sitting down with them and talking, what are you going to be talking about? We are going to come to an understanding. You don't have an answer. I see. Rather, the answer, because Cornell West is nobody's fool, the answer is ugly. The answer is going to be, we're going to carve up Ukraine. We're going to carve up Ukraine. So his answer there makes me cast doubt on his answer when he says he's talking about how the unions are not being supported. He's talking about the woes of the GOP voters right now, the MAGA folks. I think he's right. I think he's right. We do have to reach out to them. Not because we need them to win. I'll be honest with you, we don't. And with their current political stances, I think we have an obligation to steamroll them. We can't take in the opinions of folks that are saying, well, we need to figure out which Americans, we're going to genocide. No, the answer there is just like the answer is with Russia and Ukraine. Zero, none. It's not an acceptable thing to negotiate over. We do not negotiate over whether or not Americans have a right to exist. But we still have to talk to these people because they need help. They are all Candace Owens. They are all Dave Rubin. They are all everybody who is supporting these. It's so hard for me not to say the word devils because it's Friday Peace Talks. I apologize. That was a weak way of me saying devils. These people who are selling us out, everybody who is supporting them is betraying themselves. We have to talk with them because they are hurting. They're hurting, by and large, less than other groups, but they're still being hurt by the same things. And we need to convince them that the end of their suffering will come quicker. Relief for their suffering will come quicker. They will prosper. The beginning of when they prosper will come quicker if they work with us. We should do that. But we should be talking about the practical nuts and bolts right away, immediately following the acknowledgement that they are suffering. So we acknowledge that they're suffering, and then we say what we're going to do about it. What are we going to do about it? Stronger support for unions. No more will we be siding with the Norfolk Southern Company over the unions. Federal laws being enforced. Federal laws being written that make unions mandatory for some businesses, for certain sized businesses, let us say. Nationalizing, let's say, the rails. Nationalizing things that the whole nation relies upon. I'm up for nationalizing internet service. I'm up for nationalizing healthcare. I'm up for nationalizing the trains. I'm up for nationalizing, basic food needs. Having a grocery store, which is government run. I'm up for nationalizing the production of medicine. All those chemicals that save lives that no longer have active patents on them. There's no reason the U.S. shouldn't be making them, and therefore making them cheaper for all U.S. citizens. I think Cornell West is an interesting cat. I think we will have to keep watching him from time to time. But as a presidential candidate, I think he is not being very serious. And I think he knows it. I think he is doing a messaging campaign with no intention of actually getting the office. And so, until I see otherwise, I'm going to treat it like that. Disappointing about Ukraine. Disappointed that he wasn't talking nuts and bolts quite so much. But was pleased to see that he acknowledges that some of the people displaying the worst behavior right now are doing so for reasons which are sad and understandable and things we can fix. Let's see what the wicked community has to say.